make going into spoken English is to make it into third person. So then you would see the food go through the throat, and after the throat, you see it move into such and such and such and such and such and such, but that fits the goal, the setting, the register a bit more. Even the speaking style, the discourse style, more than staying in that first person. First person just feels a bit elementary and a bit like fun and enjoyable, or it might not fit for other goals. So that in a nutshell is constructed action. In English, hopefully this semester we get a bit more in tune with, ooh, I'm listening to a story and that moment sounds right for constructed action. So even though in English we have no such thing as constructed action, actually in stories one could argue that when I see quotation marks, that's a nice little prompt for us to maybe become the person talking. That's more constructed dialogue rather than constructed action. Constructed action is more me becoming the food through the digestive system. Constructed dialogue is pretty easily identified in storybooks with quotation marks, right? Obviously that's dialogue between different characters. So that's a pretty obvious prompt for me to start role shifting, becoming each character. But some moments in English aren't as obvious, and I just start getting more in tune with, I get more comfortable with playing with the language and saying, even though English, there was nothing about that English sentence that necessarily said, Angela, go ahead and put constructed action or dialogue here, but I just thought it might be worth a shot and might lend to more clarity if I tried it out. So either opportunities were missed, so that could be a bit of feedback that we share, or opportunities were capitalized on. Even though they were capitalized on, maybe I forgot who was what in which role shift space, right? So that could be something we talk about when giving feedback. That space didn't carry through for the same character throughout the story and kept switching up, so that got confusing in the interpretation. So things like that. Constructed action and dialogue is a big umbrella, has there's a lot to it. Just because there's no parallel in English, like I said, other than in a storybook having quotation marks. And because they're so different, it's harder for students to grasp. It's less tangible, I guess I'd say. But with that so far, any questions on what I did put out there? Okay. All right. The one more that I care about for today is this one. So use of space. Okay. What is use of space? And do we have it in spoken English or ASL, or where do we find use of space? ASL. Okay. So what is it? How would I give feedback on use of space? What might I see that would fit in that category?
Text that we're going to show soon, I think it's where you set things up, where your signing space is.
Okay.
Do you use space correctly? Like, are you setting someone up and then all of a sudden they're over here now, and then it just doesn't make sense and it's confusing?
Okay. So it sort of overlaps with constructed action and dialogue potentially.
Yeah.
That's another important thing, these categories. I mean, language is fluid and overlaps one another. These categories were the outcome circle doing their best to come up with discrete categories, but they're still going to have some overlap.
Even when you're just describing things in general, are you saying, like, is your signing space like this small when like really it should be bigger or larger?
Okay. And sometimes that might fall more into articulation, but definitely, I mean, if I'm limiting myself to just here, then I'm not capitalizing on space the way the language allows me to. Or could allow me to, yeah.
Our space can be horizontal but also vertical.
Yeah.
We can show differences between adults and children in stories by eye gaze and signing up or signing down.
Awesome.
Showing status as well. But one thing that I remember from the phone call with Jim that we interpreted last semester was his insurance company. He referred to them as this space up here, and then probably 30 seconds later he points up here, and it completely changes the entire discussion around that around that passage, because he's referring to his insurance company, and before that you're not sure who it is, who
Right.
is the other agent in
Right.
this discussion.
Mm-hmm, definitely. And eye gaze is big, eye gaze is often overlooked. That's a great point, yeah.
I know this came up, a lot of times like lists would come up
Mm-hmm.
or like categories, I think the pay bracket,
Yep,
Yeah.
pay range.
yep,
And so
yep,
you can set it up this way, which makes a little more sense than setting it up
horizontally.
this way,
yeah.
cause you can kind of see like I'm moving up in the pay bracket rather than I'm moving to the right, it doesn't.
Right,
So
right,
you can
right.
kind of choose your space to
Mhm.
be able to visually like, you're like climbing the ladder, you can
Right.
see that.
I remember the extension too.
Oh.
2
The
weeks is
extension of the
here,
rental.
and then beyond the 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So sometimes time, so that's an example of time. So when we're talking about a timeline, well, a timeline can be left to right, probably not gonna be right to left unless we're going back chronologically, right? So left to right, but time can also be showed in regards to, well, how close am I to my body? So temporally, right in front of my body tends to mean what in ASL? Like this space right
Near
here.
to now.
Near to now or now, right? Because you can't really like be on top of yourself to show the sign for right now. So right now is produced right in front of my body, right? But then from there I can move more forward or I can move to the past, right? So I can show time as, in proximity to my body, am I right in front of my body? Am I way in front of my body? Am I just a little bit in front of my body? And also I can move backwards, but a timeline can also be shown left to right, which came up with the car rental piece. Okay, that's a nice summary of use of space. Questions? I know that's a lot, but it's a good refresher for all of us too, since it's now been a few months since we really revisited that. Grammatical structure is that's another category you'll see on that rubric, but we'll touch more on that as time goes on this semester. I don't think that's one that we need to focus on right this moment. But any questions in general, stuff that's still unclear in our minds? For you, Kelly, it might just be like, as time goes on, like, what was that word again? Because as you saw with the GTC, you're like, I'm noticing that something's not quite right here, I just don't have the lingo to talk
Yeah.
about it, or the label. And that's perfectly okay. All right, so that's a lot on the rubric. Now with that, we don't have a ton of time left, let's see. Yeah, we don't really have much time to dive into actually dive into feedback. So what I'll usually do, just so you know, I'll wrap up the last couple minutes with this. I have index cards and I just write one of the categories. I pick the most popular ones or the ones that I know will probably come up for this piece. Or I'll watch the pieces beforehand and say, here are the ones to focus on today. We'll shut that off so it's not glaring. And so it's basically musical cards, kind of like musical chairs. You each get a card, you each get an area of focus. So we'll watch, not a whole piece, we'll skip around. If you've got, I'll always defer to you, even though we try to depersonalize and separate it from you. But are there places that you'd really rather not watch, which I want to respect? Places that you saw, there were a lot of struggle, and I'd like to hear about that struggle. What are we seeing? Like, what caused that struggle? Like, help me figure that out. Or sometimes we had a moment we felt really proud of that we want to watch as well. So you guys are in the driver's seat. If it's your piece of work, you tell me where you'd like to go. But we'll watch, I'd say 2 to 3 minutes total, jumping around any piece. And this has to do usually with homework text I'm talking. In-class work is different because we all just witnessed it. We're not going to take the video that this is really for all of you, we're not going to take the video and show it up here. When we do feedback in class, other than homework text, which is another category, so homework text aside, we're not going to be using the screen at all. We will have all just been there and witnessed the interpretation. So if you weren't part of the interpretation, you'll be taking notes throughout. So we won't have cards or anything specific. We're going to be taking general notes on the data that we saw transpire, basically, and then we're going to have a discussion based on what we saw. Same rules for safe space apply. We just don't have these things. These cards are for homework text because now we have a video to show, and then we can use the video as our anchor. So that's that in a nutshell. As far as feedback, safe space, classroom culture, how we're gonna be looking at the work. Like I said, mostly a review for you guys, maybe new for you. But it is gonna be different this semester, whereas last semester it was all video. And I was given specific categories. This semester, you're not getting those categories as much. So it's good to brush up on that rubric. If you guys have time to do that in the next couple weeks, if you really weren't clear on anything we talked about today and need to do a little more reinforcement at home, I suggest you do that. Because I will ask you where certain bits of feedback would fall, what category, because the more articulate we can get with that rubric and that lingo and those labels, the better off we're gonna be, because we're gonna be able to pinpoint our patterns, and it's gonna come in handy for the portfolio, but also talking next year with practicum supervisors and just having language to talk about the work that we see, I think is important. Two hands, I don't know who
You
had
go
one
first.
first.
Okay. So could I look like through the rubric when I'm trying to come up with
Yeah,
GPC ideas and stuff like that?
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Okay.
There's a few different rubrics, so that, that grant came up with a few different ones. That's the one I like the best.
Okay.
You still saw that I skipped over some of it.
Mhm.
So if you need me to like sit with you and highlight, I'm happy to do that, like here are the more salient ones. Let me make sure that that version is up on Blackboard. I know you have rubrics up there, I just wanna make sure that this specific one, which happens to be my favorite, is up there. Not that other rubrics aren't helpful for you to look at too, but this just happens to be the one that I think is the best, yeah.
I know last semester after our first feedback day, there were some like requests we added into feedback days.
Yeah.
So is that still, should
Yeah.
we do it after the first one? I know last semester we said it's preferred that we used soft voices when giving feedback. It feels nicer when I tell you how successful the work was. And then
maybe moments that needed improvement,
sound nicer.
but the soft voice was nicer.
That was something that everyone liked. I know something for me was that when someone says in the work, this piece wasn't successful, but I did this.
When they compared to their own
to their
piece, yeah.
personal, which it's like super easy to give a suggestion and for it to like come out like that, but to try and take everyone totally out of it, even the
Yeah,
person giving
agreed.
feedback,
Yeah.
was something that I would appreciate.
Mhm.
So it might be easier after we do a feedback day
Yeah,
for other
yeah.
things to come up, but I know last semester, those are things that the three of us
Yeah,
appreciated.
appreciated. So we've got
Um,
soft voices, and I do agree. I think whereas we're trying to distance this piece that we see up here, or the piece that just transpired and we're all in the room for, we're trying to distance it from those interpreters, but then we involve ourselves with our own, even though the in-class work, that's not gonna be an issue anyway, because you won't have done it as well. But the homework pieces we all did,
Yeah.
everybody did the same piece together. So we're back in that, it's easy to compare games. So yeah, it's not about comparing. So as far as separation from self, that includes the selves that aren't up here at that moment as well, yeah.
One thing that I know I really appreciated was bad habits, which isn't really a category on the rubric, but I know that I include a lot of negative head shakes. And
Negation.
so
Yeah.
that negation completely skews a bunch of messages throughout all of my work, and it's really helpful for any habits that people see in my work to be pointed out, even though they're not gonna mention Felix did this, just in the work I noticed these behaviors.
Patterns, yeah.
Another one was in MLA, the or pressed mouth working, which now is something that I just write about with articulation and intent content in my analysis of my own work when I'm reflecting on all of it.
So this just came up all the time, and it's
My thinking face,
It's skewed meaning, yeah.
also timestamps if possible. Help
So while
to
we're
go
watching,
back
yeah.
later on.
I
Okay.
try to always keep the time code up, now this isn't connected, but yeah, obviously you've got the time code at the bottom.
Yeah.
And sometimes it just won't stay, even if you've got the cursor right on it, so please tell me if I'm doing something wrong. But if it
Like-
disappears, just let me know, I'm happy to put that
Don't
back
think
up.
you have to be on top of it, and at 2 minutes and 43 seconds I saw this,
But,
but around 2.5 minutes this
Is
behavior
helpful.
came up, and
Yep.
we try to do it for everyone else so that when you go back later to write your reflections, you have points you can reference.
Yeah. and it's easier than, flooding yourself through the whole
With the
piece
whole-
and
yeah.
where are we going here? So
It
even if
saves
you
so
didn't
much
get
time.
the exact timestamp, and sometimes it disappeared and we're all just into it and the time codes are gone, write down the topic. So when they were asking about this, so give context, and that's helpful rather, again, than going through the whole thing.
Surprisingly, usually one of us has it.
Yes.
Between the four of
Yes,
us, sometimes
I
one of
know,
us
you
always
guys are
just
good, you guys are good like that, you guys are good like that. So, we've got like 2 minutes left of class, so we didn't get to, and I'm okay with that, we didn't get to the actual feedback. This was much more important to make sure it was firm and just established, and it's not always the funnest thing for students, but very necessary. Hopefully, we saw last semester that it helps us grow, it's how we learn, right? And if learning in a classroom is kind of what we're here to do, right? So safe space is really big for me, anybody who violates those types of rules is obviously gonna be asked not to do that again. If it's repeated, I'm gonna ask you to step out, right? We can't tamper with that safe space, it's too valuable for our learning and our progression, and just keeping that trust with one another, okay? Because I get it, video work can be kind of vulnerable.
It's
Alright.
fun.
It's
You're gonna
fun.
like
Sounds like.
But it's so
Honestly.
so
I know,
what's
I
very
used to
different
feedback
now,
sessions
Kelly?
are really fun.
But it's I mean, you
It's
learn
really
a
helpful.
lot, it's getting data, but it's
So helpful.
gonna be different for Kelly because feedback sessions are only gonna happen that way when we have homework text to go over, which I think is 5 throughout the semester. I don't know if I'm confusing you guys with the seniors, but I think it's 5 homework texts. But otherwise, it's gonna be, what did we just see, let's talk about what we just saw. Which is just a very different vibe, very different feel, so I think it'll be a different experience for her as well. But, I mean, I wish I had more of it when I was here, so I get a little jealous of you guys sometimes, I'm like, you already know so many of your own patterns. I wasn't figuring this stuff out till 2-3 years after I graduated,
You
so
put
you
Charlotte.
guys are ahead of the game, I know.
You did all of Charlotte.
I did all of Charlotte, yes, I did all of Charlotte.
Honestly,
Speaking of
that
which,
would-
I've got to email Dennis, I gotta get you guys access to that. And I will share those, portfolio pieces that they did last semester. Or, I mean, if anybody,
just add
my
it to
apartment and
You
have
can add it
like
to
sharp
inquiry if
irons.
she wants to
Well,
watch.
elephants.
Yeah, I think that would be more helpful.
but she wouldn't have
She would have
oh no, I
access
had
to
to
all the
email
videos
links to
in
you
there.
guys last semester. I emailed links,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
So I could just forward you those links.
I mean,
Cause Vimeo.
But, I mean, if I give her access to the channel, she has access to all your interpretations. I mean, that's or if you need some time, it's probably best not to ask that on the spot. If you guys wanna give that some thought, I mean, if you're okay, she's about to see your work this semester, so I guess it's not.
There's plenty
that
of
much of a
entertaining
difference.
pieces.
there are a lot of great
It's a good Friday night
thumbnails
with
on
popcorn
video.
activity.
No.
The thumbnails from our class are pretty great.
Yeah.
Oh my
I love looking through the
Was
thumbnails.
the baseline, my thumbnail, I'm literally like this. Like, I was trying to be a cat, so like I don't know what I was doing, but it's literally paused.
A big
Feel
fat
like-
I have
cat.
one like,
Felix opens it in the middle of linguistics, and I look over, and it's a picture of me going.
Nice.
it looks like a gorilla.
You can have some great moments.
Yeah, I don't know.
There'll be a
Like,
lot of
it
good
looks like
memories.
the sign for gorilla or monkey.
I don't know what it is.
You're like, I don't know.
I was a cat, so.
But yes, okay, so I'll let you guys think about that. If you're okay with her being added to that channel, but I don't wanna ask you on the spot, just let me know. How about if you're not okay with it, email me by like tonight, okay?
Okay.
And that's perfectly okay, cause I can just get her the links and she can play with those in her own time. If
And
you
I
need to
think the
submit
majority
anything,
of the
it's more of a
videos are
schema.
like with, no, are
What
they
do you
not?
What do you mean?
Oh, the same
Or with-
screen. You mean?
Oh yeah, you get the stimulus and us on the same screen, so
Yeah.
you would see
Screen.
Like what we were
awkward
doing.
Jarvis and also our interpretation of Jarvis being awkward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the stimulus and then the interpretation, but which you don't need to deal with this semester.
Yeah.
Because the reason you have the stimulus split screen is it's interactive. So you had a deaf person involved and a hearing person involved, so I can't not see what they're signing. But this semester, if it's all monologue style. So if there's an ASL piece I'm putting into English, I just have the camera or the screen recording of the ASL, but it doesn't need to capture my face at all, so. More monologue this semester really and going forward in general, so you don't need so much worry
If you
about
need
that.
help with the screen recording, just let me know.
Yes,
Okay.
he is,
You can call him
he's
anytime
your
of the
one. Although I hear you're savvy with computers
I know
as
how to
well.
do screen recordings on this thing already, so.
There you go, so you're good.
Yeah.
All right, guys, sorry we didn't get to that just yet, but I think this was more worth our time. So Monday we'll be doing feedback on the if you give a mouse a cookie baseline,
Or a cat
and
a
we're gonna
cupcake.
be,
Or a cat.
or if you
cupcake.
give a cat a cupcake for the one who already did that. So that's what we'll be doing on Monday, and we'll do some, our first bit of live work.
Ooh.
It's gonna be
Woo.
so fun.
Do we
So
have
come
homework
dressed and
text?
ready for that.
Yeah, do we have
Homework
any
text,
slides?
I think you do, that was
I have
somewhere
it written
back
down.
when I, but
Wait, we
I
have
mean,
to do?